Well, Greg, thank you for joining me this morning in Seattle, this evening in Switzerland. As the CIO of Syngenta, I've had a chance to watch what you and your organization have done from afar and more recently up closely. And one of the things that I think is so striking, especially recently, is we take food supply and something that is so vital to our existence very often for granted. And COVID, I think, has really put a bright spotlight on it. And I'd love you to share just a bit about what Syngenta's mission is, not only pre-COVID, but right now during COVID, and what really supporting and enabling farmers looks like post-COVID.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for the nice to be with you today. Thanks for the opportunity. So the Syngenta Group is a group of four business units inside Syngenta. We're primarily an ag innovator. We're in about 90 countries around the world. Our primary businesses are selling both seeds and crop protection products. So we're selling primarily to farmers and to those people who advise farmers. We're about $23 billion in sales, about 48,000 employees worldwide, headquartered here in Switzerland, which is where I'm based. But the U.S. market's about 40% of our market. So, and as you can imagine, Mother Nature doesn't stay home. So, spring came and it's here,
Right.
and farmers have to do their job because they have to be able to earn a living. So I think it has been really interesting, and I agree with what you said that especially the food prices in the U.S. has really shed a light. And I think I know for the first time in my lifetime is actually a number of store shelves were empty back in April, May, and it got a little bit better. And it is something that really you tend to take for granted. And I think coming out of all this, there'll be a lot of questions around whether or not the supply chain is too much choke points, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's more than enough food being produced. The problem is it's not getting where it's supposed to, and also the demand side shocks that we're seeing from the shutdowns of restaurants to that volume then shifting to groceries. The grocery stores obviously weren't prepared, and there's some interesting statistics. Like very simple one is the cost of a rotisserie chicken is like up 160% versus a year ago, but chicken legs are down 36%. And that's because restaurants buy pieces, and people shopping from home are buying kind of these whole parts. So what you really see is this sort of shifting in SKU mix between food. So this really creates a problem not only for cattle farmers but also for agriculture farmers as well.
Yeah. Well, Greg, one of the reasons I reached out to you was you can't help, if you're tracking the news, the term digital transformation is being thrown about by everybody. It's like who better to have on than a global CIO and to get their perspective. And your background, though, doesn't come just from ag. You had been in the biotech space. You'd been with Motorola, I believe, before Syngenta Group as well. Can you speak a little bit to how similar, dissimilar is it to be a CIO leader in those different industries? More similar than not?
Well, I think more similar than not. I've kind of always been pretty careful about the companies and industries I've worked in. I've been really lucky that whether it was in healthcare or life sciences and then in mission critical communications and now in ag, it's, kind of always picked these markets that have been really sort of had a broader social purpose, which is something that's been sort of really motivating for me personally. But a lot of the core principles of being in IT are pretty simple and pretty much the same. So, at the end of the day, people want similar things from a CIO department, depending on which industry you're in, right? They want someone who cares about the productivity of the average employee. They want someone who takes responsibility to, for what it's like for customers to do business with you. You have to have this sort of thoughtful balance of risk and benefit, right? I think things like information security versus usability, which they often compete with each other. Knowing the difference between what's hype and what's real. And I think the other thing is, regardless of what industry you're in, and applications are different, right? The closer you get to customer tends to vary, but then when you move backwards, it's, a lot of it's the same stuff. And the thing with, I think, all of us in IT, and I think why the digital transformation has been, it's sort of been IT's time to arrive, I think, is because IT has always been in this Venn diagram between sort of, what technology makes possible and what the challenges are in the business. And when those two things sort of intersect and you bring them together like a Venn diagram, that part in the middle is the area where, if, as a technology person, you have the ability to uniquely influence and see how technology can actually apply in a specific case within the company. So I think regardless of the industry you're in, there's pretty broad themes. But obviously, there's a learning curve that you have to learn. But other than that, I think it's more similar than dissimilar.
I read an article. It's a few years dated now, but I think it's still relevant. And it was a Forbes survey of CIOs and other technology leaders, and it came up with some classifications. And I wanted to get your reaction on these four. One was the transformer profile of a CIO, the advocate, the servicer, and the plumber. And the plumber is really the keeping the lights on, making sure the systems are operating. How much do you think one needs to assume an intentional transformer mindset to enact this change? Or is it, hey, you know what, the tide is rising, and because all of our providers are improving, we're going to be beneficiaries?
Yeah, I think it's layers of an onion. So I don't think it's either or. I think if you are not providing a reliable service, you'll never be given the right to kind of move up the stack. So you can never be a transformer or a leader if you don't demonstrate basic competencies. And in today's day and age, everybody expects SAP to work, and you have a good network and all those kinds of things. So I think you have to sort of master one before you can move up the next. And I think in other jobs that I've been in as a new CIO, you come in and you see sort of like a lot of stability issues. And it's actually, and I think some of the mistake that people make is they try to jump right to transform. And the problem is you've got no credibility there. So you've got to really go and sort of just get the basics right, demonstrate your ability to quickly be able to get that under control. And as those things get more stable, then I think you build credibility that you can then parlay later on into being more and more influential to the boardroom discussions and where things go. So I think it is true that in the last 10 years, IT is now on the radar as being something that you can make money from versus a necessary evil that costed money. But I think to be able to really have the influence on it, you kind of have to move up that ladder of credibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things you referenced in something you wrote, posted on LinkedIn a couple years back, was this notion of the future belongs to the curious. And when you talk about this parlaying, I almost think about, earn the right to exhibit the courage to bet on maybe a startup. Like, don't dismiss the startups is one of the things you had highlighted. And that's what I react to as you share that, really the combination of the two. When you think of someone who strives from a career standpoint to become a CIO some days, what are that was a good piece of advice. What other piece of advice would you offer someone who has that as a career aspiration?
Yeah, I think that people in IT don't select CIOs, so it's important to understand that the people you've probably been trying to look good to are different than the people that are going to be the ones that not only put you in the new job, but are actually going to determine your success. And so I think you, in a lot of ways, you have to almost strive to be almost indistinguishable between a business leader and an IT leader. And I think if you're able to position yourself in that way, you become attractive, because now of course, you do need to understand technology. I mean, I think there is almost this unwritten rule that you need to be kind of the most technically savvy person in that sort of function. But I think what people really are looking for are really good people leaders that can generate an inspiring vision, know how to lead and build teams, and then ultimately be able to paint what a possible future looks like. Because I think that the challenge that I see with many people in IT as they work their way up is, over the course of a lot of our careers, we've sort of been trained that being on time and on budget and on quality is the secret to success. And earlier in your career, that's true. But to a large degree, that means that you're just sort of doing what's being asked of you. And what I think, when you think about how IT is sort of changing how companies think about the way they compete and service customers, there's actually a whole lot of greenfield there that a lot of people don't really take the time to go in there. So it's sort of like they're kind of used to more taking orders, and you really have to start getting in the business of creating a future that's actually pretty audacious, that has a ton of risk. And I think that's the other thing that you learn in IT is you kind of learn over time to really minimize risk. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to make a difference, you can't do that by trying to be really risk averse. So I think you have to be really good at leaning into the business, taking risks, and also just being able to paint a future that's pretty bold that you can enroll people around. And I think that's something that's a little different because it's a pretty lonely job. When you're in there as the only person at the top, and you don't have a whole network to support you. So I think those are some of the things that are different.
Mm-hmm. So, Greg, when you think about creating a vision, enrolling other people's in that vision, and then executing it, I really view part of the CIO's job is to have an inside-out, sort of this emanating effect. I'm gonna come up with a vision for transformation, enable people to do it, and get and move. How do you think about outside-in transformation? So, someone who's maybe not part of your direct org saying, "Hey, Greg, I have an idea. I have this transformative notion. Can I get your support?" How do you process outside-in motions?
Yeah. So how do you get this is outside the IT functions, but inside the company? Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you get someone outside of IT that has a real vision? How do you really rally around them? Well, look, I think one of the mistakes that I've seen in IT in modern times is there's this term shadow IT, and it's a term that's pejorative, and what it sort of refers to that if it's not SAP, it's no good, right? Or if it's not Salesforce, it's no good. And I think that the truth is that more and more over my career, especially now as digital natives work their way into management positions and millennials are working their way up, these are people who really enjoy technology. It's transformed their consumer lives, and they have that same appetite to bring to the enterprise life. So I don't think, I think every year that goes by is more and more IT no longer has a monopoly on good ideas on which piece of software is the right one and how to use it. So I think you have to lean in and really, what I listen for when and a lot of it depends on the source, of course, but if there's someone that, I was on a call a couple hours ago with our head of R&D for Seeds, and he's someone I respect a lot. And he really is passionate about technology. So when he sees a possibility, I'm listening for what that possibility is. And I think a lot of times in a role like ours or any role in IT, there's more demand than there is enough time and energy and effort to do everything. So you're kind of listening for what's wrong with the idea. And I think you just have to be listening for what's really potentially great about the idea. And if you could, and I think if you really get underneath of that idea and people have the experience of being heard, you have a whole lot more latitude to sort of shift the how. And a lot of times where things go wrong are the how conversation, right?
Right.
Like let's throw out SAP and do Oracle, and let me tell you all the reasons that doesn't work. But usually if you're really listening, there's some specific thing behind it that you got to get to the bottom of to be able to actually navigate the conversation. And I think if you come at it with this sort of usual defensiveness, that's kind of this trope in IT, the more you resist it, the more they're either going to go around you or try to do it on their own or hire their own team, and then everybody loses. So I think you really have to lean in and listen for the possibilities and the new ideas.
Yeah, one of the most impactful customer visits I had in the last 2 years was to a company that focused on space exploration. And one of the things I loved hearing from some of the, I would call mid-20s engineers, was this almost irrational optimism. It was incredible. And is it all feasible? Probably not. But let me tell you, there's going to be some incredible goodness coming out of that. Yeah. So speaking to people who are maybe earlier in their career, how are you coaching your leaders within the IT organization who are responsible for leading people for whom COVID is the first significant blip? Like everything's been up and to the right, things are fast moving, and now something pretty significant has been introduced. How are you seeing younger people in their career faring? And what advice are you giving?
Yeah, I think it's something that I believe, and I actually think this is somewhat of a generational shift as the boomers sort of retire and maybe the Gen Xers of the world come in, right, like me and you. I think leadership scales and control doesn't. And I think what COVID does is you're no longer really in control of your population. You can't watch what people are doing and see what's happening. And I think it's creating this really great withdrawal of control. So, but I think if you really inspect, at least what I've learned over the years, is that if you really, you can inspire the organization and they become self-motivated. And when they're self-motivated, you've got to now get them sort of aligned to a clear set of objectives. And then you've just got to stay out of their way and hopefully enable them in places and not try to block them in other places. And I think what a lot of newer managers, if they've learned, sort of for maybe what they've heard is the idea is to manage your employees' workload, right? I'm just going to tell them what to do and tell them not to do this and do that. And I think this kind of is actually pretty healthy because it throws people in a world where you can no longer operate using pure control. You've got to actually do a better job communicating clearly what's required. You can't do daily stand-ups anymore in a similar kind of way. So I think this is actually a positive thing that will really re-equip the next generation of leaders for the type of leadership that I think the newer generation underneath of them are really expecting from a work relationship.
Mm-hmm. Well, Greg, thank you for joining us today. When I think back at one of your earlier comments, this notion of the transformer CIO really seems like you are a transformer profile who has earned his way into that position. And I think one of the takeaways from me today will be your line around leadership scales, control doesn't. And it doesn't mean that control is bad, but holy smokes, you better put a good weighting on that other part of the equation. So, Greg, thank you. And have a good evening. Okay, take care. Thanks so much, Greg. I know it's a long end of a day for you. I know being on another Zoom call is probably not at the top of your list. So
no worries. It was my pleasure. Did it work for you?
Did it work for me? Yeah, it was great. Yeah, the perspective of hearing from I'll call them progressive CIOs is really important because I think business team members need to hear that it's what did you say, that the defensive posture, having this, well, let me inspect as to why this isn't possible. I think unfortunately a lot of people do possess that belief. And I think hearing from people who are actually in the seat, who are saying something different, I think speaks volumes. So thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Okay, well, we continue to enjoy working with your team, and we're here to support.
Yeah, thanks for all your support this time. Appreciate it.
Okay, Greg. Take care.
So long.